Welcome to Marketer of the Month. Today we have with us a special guest from A2IM. He is here with us at South by Southwest, and Richard is the CEO of A2IM. So he's going to be giving us a little bit of an overview of what he does and what A2IM is, and then we're going to dive into some questions. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to see you. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I guess to start with, would be very great to just learn a little bit about A2IM. So what do you guys do, and then we can go from there.
Sure. Well, A2AM was formed 20 years ago, actually, this year. And I've been associated with A2AM pretty much from the beginning. I was a member from 2005 when it was formed. And eventually I wound up on the board, and I wound up as chairman of the board. And then when my predecessor left, they asked me if I wanted to take the job. There was a wide search, and at the end, they asked me if I wanted it, and I thought it was a pretty cool job, so I did. I took it. Previous to that, I was at the Smithsonian, that's Smithsonian Folkways Recordings, and so I've really enjoyed it. I've been here 10 years now, and last year in June at our yearly conference, I announced that I was going to resign as of the end of this year. So this is my 10th year, and I had just decided that 10 years was a good period of time to do this. I have other things I want to do, but it's really a great organization. I've been very happy here, and it's they really achieves a lot, I think, and has achieved a lot over its 20 years history.
Yeah. And would you be able to share kind of some things that details about what you guys do and what makes you guys unique or special?
Sure. Well, the full name of the organization is the American Association of Independent Music. And so it basically represents independent record labels primarily. But we also have, publishers as part of it. And then we have these associate members who are not voting members of the organization, but they're the service industries that really work with the independents. And what we really do is we, you know, look out for the well-being of independent labels in every way, shape, or form. So on one hand, we say that we do advocacy, uh, education, and connection. So it's, you know, that being an independent is a bit isolating because you very often, if you're a very small label, it's just you or a couple of employees, and you don't have any contact with other people. If you work for a major label, you've got contact with hundreds, maybe thousands of other people. That's not true with the independents. So A2IM is a way of sort of connecting the dots between the independents, and then also spreading knowledge. That's the education part. And then if something's going wrong in the sector in general, or if we feel that things are moving against the best interest of the independents, then we do advocacy, and that takes several forms. One is the most obvious form, which is we have political advocacy in Washington, D.C. with Congress and the regulatory agencies, but also we sometimes represent the independents' best interest in the states as well. And we work with all the other trade associations too, where we have common interests. And then we do advocacy, which is direct. If something's going wrong with a relationship with a distributor or some other kind of organization that's an associate member of service industry for the independents, then we'll very often have those conversations with them to see where the problems lie and what we can sort out. So it's really just in the widest possible sense, just looking out for the best interest of the independent recording industry.
Interesting. And when you look at the independent recording industry, do you feel like their current approach to marketing and getting the word out, as you said, they're much smaller organizations, they don't have the networks. When they approach marketing, how do you help them kind of think that through and improve in the way they market their independent label?
Well, we have an annual conference called Indie Week, and we have a lot of panels at that conference, and we also do roundtables, we do keynote speeches, and then there's just simply networking. So a lot of this information is sort of conveyed, sort of peer-to-peer, as it were. So, we do several marketing panels every Indie Week, and that really helps disseminate information as to the sort of state of the art of of marketing in the independent sector, which is somewhat different than marketing in the major label sector because most independent labels have less money than the major labels do. So they have to be more kind of guerrilla, as it were. They have to be more kind of grassroots. But we have some independent labels that really have extremely high revenues, the independents also have broken some very big artists. I mean, I always point out that Adele and Taylor Swift were both independent until a couple of years ago, when their contracts were up with the independent labels, and they wound up going to the majors. So, it's not that the independents can't have big hits; they definitely can. But it is true that the independents very often get interested in music that is a little more niche than the major labels do because they have the capability to take these niche artists and develop them in a way maybe that the major labels would not be interested in.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And have you seen now that, with the growth of Instagram and TikTok, for music discovery? So a lot of people are now finding these artists that may not have been easy to find in the past. People are finding them on, they're at least discovering a portion of their music, a portion of their songs on these platforms. How has that kind of changed the ability for independent labels to get hits? And I'm guessing it's probably improved their odds of getting hits.
I think the new tools are really interesting. I think, TikTok, what I hear is that the biggest difficulty is having any control over it. It's one thing, if you get a viral hit and it causes a spike in your streams, then everybody's grateful for that. But, if you've got a band that's bringing out a record or an artist that's bringing out a record, um, you know, it's very hard to engineer a TikTok hit these days. Maybe in the beginning it was a lot easier, but these days it seems that, um, they kind of either happen or they don't happen. And what is more useful for our labels if they have marketing tools that are somewhat controllable. You can never fully control marketing in the sense of you try things and sometimes they just don't work. But with TikTok, there's really no way to control it at all. You can make all kinds of TikToks. You can hire influencers to make them for you or whatever, but there's no guarantee that they're gonna go viral. You could just make it and it would sort of disappear without trace. So that's a bit of a challenge with the current approach, but there are a lot of avenues for independents to promote their artists. I mean, touring being the classic one, and it's still a valid path to success for a lot of independent artists.
Right, right. And have you seen AI play a role already in the way people market and the way people explore new ideas for music creation? And how do you see that playing out in terms of now with this whole new technology that not only can help you think through ideas of where to tour and how to promote your brand, but also people are using it in the generation process of generation music,
Right.
generating music, which is a whole thing in and of itself. How has that kind of impacted the industry?
So I haven't directly seen that, but I will say that I personally use AI a lot. I think it's the most powerful tool. Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obviously the most powerful tool that humanity's ever invented. I hear all the doom and gloom and everything, but I've been involved in new technologies that impact the music industry since the 70s. And every time this new technology comes along, I remember when I made the first record by computer, everybody was up in arms and this was going to be the end of the music industry. And it hasn't been the end of the music industry. In fact, everybody makes records by computer now. Same thing when I brought out electronic drums, it was going to be the end of the world and wasn't the end of the world. So I don't think it's going to be the end of the world either. And I think that it is a really useful tool. And I haven't seen direct examples of how people are using it for marketing, but I can tell you that I use it for research a great deal. And I find it amazingly useful. And I think in terms of the creation, a lot of people aren't talking about the creation using AI because it's kind of a controversial topic. But I'm certain that musicians will always use the latest technology. It's been true since time immemorial. I mean, once upon a time, there were no drums or skin stretched over hollow logs, and it started there. And then we've had all kinds of innovations since then. Stringed instruments that didn't exist at a certain point, and then we have the saxophone, the piano, the synthesizer, electric instruments. So the musicians are creative people, and they'll always use the latest technology, and I have no doubt that they'll be using AI to assist them in creating new music. And I think even though it's a controversial topic, I'm sure that in the end we'll wind up with some really great music that comes out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think it's kind of one of those things that we'll see how it develops. I think it's still so early in the game that you kind of don't have all the information of how everything's gonna play out. But I think it's really unique. I
Well,
see that.
I can say one thing about that. I mean, I recorded the first digital sample on Kate Bush's album "Never Forever" with my colleague John Waters. We were both in the band Landscape, and I had the very first or one of the first three Fairlight CMIs that came out of Australia, and I can say that as much as I was there at the beginning, I couldn't really predict which way sampling was gonna go. I mean, that first sample was pretty primitive, it was less than 30-second sample. It wasn't a very, wide frequency range. I think it was like 4 or 5K frequency range. It was pretty limited. And, it was hard to see how, samples would wind up sort of, merging with hip hop and, winding up, where you have an 8-bar sample of a track or something that goes round and round. So I think it's very difficult to say right now exactly where it's gonna go, but I'm absolutely certain that AI will become a big part of our lives and of creative life as well.
Yeah, yeah, agreed, agreed. That's an interesting point. And when you look back, it's like with the internet or with computing, and you're like,
Right.
oh, this is you can't you only figure like 20 years later, you're like, oh, that seems obvious, but
Sure.
20 years ago, it wasn't obvious. It's obvious today because you see the success and it made sense. So I think that's a great point. I know that you've done some really cool projects at Smithsonian Folkways, and I was curious to hear more about that experience, what you found most rewarding and what you found interesting.
Right. I mean, honestly, it was a really great experience, and, there were so many great projects. I mean, honestly, everything I did there was really interesting. I went there because they had the Leadbelly collection, and the Leadbelly collection was something that influenced me as a kid. Actually, lived in England until I was 9, and I got interested in Leadbelly songs without knowing it through an artist called Lonnie Donegan. And then when I was about 13, there was the person in the record store where I lived in New Zealand, um, you know, said, "You gotta listen to this record," and he handed me a Leadbelly record, and I put it on, or they put it on, and I put the headphones on as you did back in those days, in the store, and, I suddenly realized this was the original of all the stuff I had liked that Lonnie Donegan has done. It was like Midnight Special and all those kinds of songs, and, it really changed my life because I realized that as much as I liked Lonnie Donegan, that the Leadbelly songs was sort of the authentic article, and it was, incredibly exciting. So when the opportunity came up to go there, I jumped at it to work with that collection, and then subsequently, I wound up, working on so many projects, but I really wasn't on the production side there. I was, doing the business side, but I still was fortunate enough to be able to produce some things. I went to Venezuela and engineered some recordings there, and I produced or compiled the classic blues set, and then I produced Jazz's Smithsonian Anthology and Smithsonian Anthology of Hip Hop and Rap, which was really a great experience. And I was really pleased to be able to add those titles to the collection because I think that it's really important that the Smithsonian acknowledges musics like jazz and hip hop. So that was very satisfying.
That's really cool. That's really cool. It's nice to get like that broad experience and to a variety of different genres as well as being able to contribute. So I think that's a cool story. Um, do you feel, I guess, in terms of um, the play? A lot of people have been talking about, okay, how is NFTs and blockchain gonna impact independent artists? Some people say that NFTs and blockchain allow people to possibly, buy, pay, micropayments for listening to a piece of art, for listening to a piece of music. It could be, they could sell their own NFTs for,
Mhm.
like, their super fans, like, let's say their top 1,000 fans get access to a certain NFT if they've attended a certain number of, if they've, a certain number of live concerts. Um, how do you I mean, how do you kind of think through, okay, are NFTs and blockchain going to actually impact these independent artists, and how would the impacts play, how would it impact them?
So I think there are certain technologies that come along and, they're subject to, I think it's called the Gartner hype curve. And where, they're overpredicted in the short term and underpredicted in the long term. And I think, and the classic example of that is VR and AR. I'm, big VR, AR fan. I think I've got 3 sets of VR, AR headsets. And, I really enjoy VR, but it hasn't really broken out in a big way, partly because the technology is so clunky right now. It's big, it's heavy, but it's an amazing experience, and I do think that VR and AI will become a big part of our lives, some point in the future. I can't guarantee that, but it's such an amazing experience that I can't imagine it won't happen. But I think the same is true with NFTs and blockchain. People have been talking about blockchain for a long time, and then some people say, "Well, it never really happened." I go, "Well, it's happening pretty well in the crypto world." I mean, Bitcoin, was worth $108,000 the other day. It's only like 79,000 today, I think, but, it's working. And, and the thing about NFTs is I think, that was kind of discredited about 2 years ago because there was a lot of hype about it and there were people kind of, pirating people's stuff and selling them as NFTs. But, I think the concept of a token, which is effectively you know, uh, like a crypto coin or something, is pretty interesting. And I think, as you say, for ticketing, it's a great way of, sort of authenticating ownership of a ticket. But I think also that's true for purchasing things, including recordings. So I don't know exactly how it's going to manifest itself, but I think that the sort of blockchain, crypto kind of technology that underpins NFTs um, or tokens is going to be useful in the future. And I think we just got to figure out exactly what the application is. These days, I hear people refer to it more as a token because it seems like NFTs gets people's backs up because of the sort of deceptions that happened 2 or 3 years ago. Um, but the but the basic technology is solid. The other thing with blockchain I think is important is the moving from proof of work to proof of stake, because one of the big objections to blockchain is the amount of energy it consumes. Um, and proof of stake doesn't use anywhere near the same amount of energy. There are issues with proof of stake as well. Um, but I think both technologies will eventually find their way into useful applications for recording artists and live artists and the whole music industry. I think any kind of authentication is a good thing.
Fair enough, fair enough. I think that's interesting to see, that, the analogy you made with AR, VR versus kind of blockchains where you have a technology that has a tremendous amount of power.
Yeah,
The question is
right.
when will it find its, its time? And,
Well, we saw it happen with Apple recently. They brought out those, I forget what it's called now, the Apple Vision.
yeah, the Vision
And,
Pro, yeah.
Vision Pro, it was amazing, truly amazing, but it was incredibly expensive and still pretty clunky. I mean, it was a little bit better. It wasn't quite as heavy as, my first headset that I had, and doesn't have wires, which was nice. But, it's still not there. I think when we get to a point where you can do VR or AR with sort of something that resembles normal glasses, normal spectacles, that would be amazing. I've speculated that eventually it'll get to a point where it'll be in contact lenses because I think it was 20 years ago, um, you know, learned how to embed circuitry into a contact lenses. So that's a known technology. How how soon that would find its way through into something like that, I don't know. But, we're seeing that, massive miniaturization process that's going on, the doubling of power every 18 months kind of um, thing. And I think I fully expect that we'll see, you know, VR, AR integrate into our lives at some point, but also, as you say, NFTs, tokens, whatever, and blockchain. I think, the smart contract thing has been talked about for a long time. It's a really great idea. The question is implementing it. And obviously, if you could write all the splits and all the payment systems into a smart contract and have everybody be automatically be paid every time there was a transaction, that would be unbelievable. Practically speaking, I think we've got a way to go on that.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think, I think I think you're right. I think there's just this time will tell, and when it kind of happens, and when people realize this is the exact solution,
Yeah.
and at that time it'll look obvious.
I
But
mean, it's like AI, people have been talking about AI forever, and then suddenly it's here. And, you also got this kind of phenomenon with human beings where, you know, we just accept things. It becomes the norm, like, within about 2 hours. You know, I mean the fact that you can just ask AI to sort of, give you a review of a 80-page document or something, and it does it in, 5 seconds.
it's insane.
It's truly insane. Yeah, it's like it's science fiction, and yet n now I just take it for granted.
Right. Yeah. It is amazing how quickly not only how quickly it's evolved and improved in the last
Yeah,
since the launch, I guess November 22.
right.
Um, Now you have this great growth, and it is become kind of now, people are expecting it. People are now used to it.
Absolutely.
So we are quick to adapt, I guess.
I think it's an amazing thing, but it's also important to look back and go, "Wow, we've come a long way."
Right. It's true. It's true. And you have so much experience in this field. What would you say is kind of your top lessons learned along the way? What have you kind of what kind of things have you learned today? You're like, oh, that was like a big lesson, or that was a big moment where I kind of learned things. It can be multiple moments, but where you're like, I learned something that
I think the number one thing I've learned is, never give up, and that anything that's worth doing is really difficult. I often say, if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it because it's too much fun.
yeah,
And, I think more than anything, I sort of live my life out of sort of adages and sayings, but I always say, you have to kiss a lot of frogs, and the truth of the matter is that, it's very hard to do anything worthwhile the first time. You just got to try, and you got to try again. You got to try really hard. And, right when you think it's just about impossible, you're just about getting started. This is my experience in everything I do. That's true with, you know, I started out as a drummer, and, I thought I was pretty good like the first week, but, a few years later, I realized, oh my gosh, that was embarrassing. And, you just got to keep at it. The other thing I would say is you have to learn to accept failure or rejection if you're a musician. And I think, the road to success is really called failure, and you have to go down that road. If you're not prepared to go down that road, I don't think you can be successful.
sure, yeah. That's a good one, and applies beyond just the music industry. It kind of applies it.
I think everything, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
everything in life. If something, if it's a big enough thing, I mean, but probably everything in life, really, whether it's dating or being a musician or being a business person or whatever it is, being a technologist, I think you just got to go through a lot of iterations, and you've got to try things again and again and again, and be prepared to fail. But I like the fail often, fail quickly
yeah.
philosophy. I think that's a really good one. Quicker you get through the iterations that aren't going to work, the faster you can get to the iterations that will work.
Right. The more you learn,
Yeah,
because you're learning fast instead of learning slow.
build, measure, learn, I think is the saying, and I really like that one too.
Yeah, that's a good one as well.
Yeah.
One of the things talking about measurement, that I think comes up a lot is how do these independent labels think through advertising when you're trying to measure the success of your ads versus organic growth. Uh, how do you kind of guide people through this kind of understanding of, okay, well, you don't want to put 100% of your money in your first ad campaign, obviously. You want to kind of balance some organic growth strategies from paid advertising. And given that the budgets are much smaller than, the big
Yeah.
labels, they can't match the big labels when it comes to ad spend.
So I think that's sort of a secret sauce of being an independent, really, is to do a lot with a little. And if you look at the marketing spends and the A&R spends of independent labels, they are just tiny fractions of what the major labels have. But there's a sort of a truism in all this, and that is that, you know, well, I think it's a British saying, which is, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And, that's true, and, we say that in producing records, you gotta start with a really great song, and you gotta start with a really great artist, and you gotta start with something that has appeal to people, and that's hard to tell when you first start out. I mean, there's a ton of ways you kind of make those judgments. You try to sign artists that maybe they played a bunch of gigs and they've got a rabid following. It might only be a couple hundred people, but you can see the model. It's like an MVP, basically. It's like, okay, if a couple hundred people are consistently coming out to see them, that's like a MVP. And, I generally think human beings are fairly consistent. And, 200 people in, say, Baltimore is going to translate to 200 people in, many other mid-sized American cities. Um, and so I think that it's really important to ascertain whether you really do have something that has appeal as early on as possible before you throw a lot of money at it. And I think that I've seen more money wasted because people are convinced that you can kind of market anything. And I've always followed to go back to my adages, the adage that the best marketing is a great product. Now, that's not enough. Making a great product is not enough. I mean, if you put it in a box and leave it in your basement, it's not going to do anything, to take. That's another thing I try to think of is what's the extreme example of this, So, if you think, well, if I do nothing, so if I put it in a box, put it in my basement, that's really doing nothing. Well, obviously nobody's going to buy it. So you've got to get it out there and you've got to, put it in front of people. But at the same time, if you start putting it in front of people and you're getting sort of rejection all the way, you kind of have to rethink it a little bit. And sometimes it is just perseverance. You got to fail. And you got to fail often, and you got to fail quickly. But at the same time, there comes a point where you have to say maybe the product's not quite right, and that's where the build, measure, learn comes in. So I'm a big fan of the MVP concept of don't build the thing out fully until you know that you've actually got something that people like.
Correct. Yeah. I like that. I like that idea that you basically need to, a bad product with great marketing is gonna fail at the end of the day.
Still a bad product.
Yeah. And then a great product with zero marketing also
Gonna fail too. Yeah.
because you need some marketing, yeah, some awareness. Otherwise, as you said, if it's in a box in your basement, no one's gonna find it.
It's like lighting a fire. I was just telling someone the other week about lighting a fire because I grew up lighting fires, and you start out with like, well, if you do it, really primitively with a flint or rubbing sticks together, but even just with a match or with a lighter or something, you got to have the tinder, the little tiny bits that catch fire immediately, and then you got to have the medium-sized sticks that catch fire to that, and then eventually it'll catch fire on the bigger sticks or the coals or whatever. And I think marketing is exactly like that. But if you don't get that tinder lit in the beginning, you're never going to get a fire going. You can hold a match to a large log all day long, and you're never going to get a fire going.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's an interesting
I
point.
think that's how marketing works too. You got to see that spark in the beginning.
Yeah. I like that. I like that idea of like the you don't I guess one extension of that is that you don't have to focus on getting the biggest log
No,
going at the beginning. You want to focus on the small one first,
you,
and then we'll progress.
in fact, you won't get there if you focus on the big
Yeah.
bugs. It just will not. So you need a substantial amount of heat and a substantial amount of sort of things burning to get that big log
Right.
going. And so I think a lot of people skip that phase. A lot of artists skip that phase. They sort of think they're going to go straight to the stadium with something, and you just can't. You got to start in small
Yeah, you
places.
gotta crawl before you can walk, and you gotta
Totally,
walk before you can run. Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah, this has been great. Honestly, we've covered a lot of different topics. In closing, I always ask if you have any pieces of advice that you like to give uh, the audience, or anything you'd like to close with in terms of
Do you think your audience is mainly artists and mainly labels?
the audience is quite broad range. A lot of the audience is going to be on the marketing side of things, how to market these products, and music, or market businesses. So it's a lot of marketers, and so I think, but it can be general advice for marketers. There's a lot of entrepreneurs as well,
Yeah.
on the one, and
Well,
many creators.
I think one thing is to understand your market. I mean, I'm a big fan. Again, I go back to my adages, but you got to fish where the fish are.
Right.
You can fish all day. If there's no fish there, you're not going to catch
Yeah.
one. So perhaps the first thing is figure out where the fish are, and that can really vary depending on if you've got an EDM artist, it's going to be different than a hip hop artist. And if you got a hip hop artist, it's going to be different than a sort of hyper pop artist or something. So figure out where your market is and then really orient your marketing towards that and your attention towards that. I think there's a lot of wasted energy happens because people are trying to, light the big log, as it were. And yeah, so that's it really. And then I think what I said before, which is don't give up, but at the same time, be prepared to iterate. I think iteration is critically important. I mean, I still regard myself as a creative, even though, I'm sort of more on the business and advocacy side in this job. And, I don't see much difference between what I did as a musician, what I did as an artist, what I did as a producer, and what I did as a manager. It's all the same. It's sort of, you try something and you keep trying. You just keep iterating until you see that spark happen, and then just at that point, don't give up. It usually starts to happen right when you're feeling completely exhausted and you just don't feel like it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's the point, not to give up.
Yeah. Don't give up at the bottom because you
Right.
paid your dues to get to the bottom. I
Exactly right.
hope, yeah, that's a great one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's a great way to finish. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This was very informative and a lot of great quotes and sayings. Right. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.